is the highest indigenous population in Latin America, approximately the same numbers as in Bolivia, but higher. According to the last census, we have half of the population from Maya communities. And from this half of the population, 10% are not registered at birth. It means we have 1.6 million without ID, according to the numbers of the registration system in 2020. Without this certificate, citizens have no right to access education, health care services, welfare programs, right? They don't have rights of property, among others. And the poorest people have more probabilities of not being registered than the ones that live in the wealthiest zones or environments, according again to this registration system. One of the most important barriers in Guatemala is the lack of information about the process and the unaffordable fees. And this has been repeated in Honduras, also in some part of Mexico, not everywhere. And we don't have, for example, data from Nicaragua. Also, as working before, we have a very alike situation in those countries, in Honduras, Nicaragua, and Mexico, which I know the best. But now we don't have data of Nicaragua. And I will go further. Also, the parents have to pay fees for late registration. That is, they have 60 days after birth, but if they don't register the boys and the girls, they will not have the right to do so. And 75% of the births certified in the country are registered late. Also, more than 40% of the births occur out of the public system, health system, and only 33% of the midwives can approve the birth certificates. Half of our population, as I told, is indigenous, but we are also the last border to the north in this big migration corridor. This means that not only girls and boys from our countries, but also from different countries in the region, also Venezuela, Ecuador, Haiti, and others become listeners in education until they have a birth certificate. And when it comes to migrant youth, it is worse. They have access, but they don't get the certificate. And I have also here the barriers. We'll talk later about the barriers, the common barriers, and what should states do with that. Maybe we will have time to do that later. And I think it's my time.
Thank you, Carolina, and thank you for being so punctual with the time. Let me now give the floor to Delquaz, who is joining us from the Global Survivors Fund. She will talk to us about the challenges to access education for children born from conflict-related sexual violence in Iraq. Thank you, Delquaz. Welcome.
Yes, thank you, Christina, and hello, everyone. Let me just start by thanking the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion and Child Identity Protection for organizing this very important event. I will be addressing the obstacles faced by children of conflict-related sexual violence survivors in accessing education in the context of Iraq. So the impact of violence extends, far beyond the battlefield and conflict areas, as we all know, and it seeps into the lives of innocent children, especially those who are born of sexual violence, from sexual violence. And these children face immense difficulties in pursuing education, which is a fundamental right. And this is also guaranteed in the Iraqi constitution as a right and as a fundamental factor in the progress of society, but it's very often denied to them. So let me also just give you a very brief background of, what the context of Iraq and what happened a couple of years ago. So you might know that ISIS, also known as Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, quickly gained control over significant areas in Iraq and Syria by August 2014. So the group really targeted minority communities, such as Christians, Yazidis, but also Shia, Shabak, and Shia Turkmen, by using tactics of terror, which included sexual violence, slavery, and systematic rapes. And in particular, ISIS targeted the Yazidi community in Sinjar, and this led to the execution of thousands, but also the abduction of more than 6,000 women, children, and men. And many of these women and girls faced sexual violence, and some of them also gave birth to children as a result. So following the liberation, survivors of ISIS captivity, especially mothers of children born from sexual violence, faced rejection from the broader society, from their communities, from their families, and which led them with a very difficult choice of either keeping their children and losing the support of their families, or giving up their children and to be able to rejoin with their families and communities. So in Iraq, we have currently close to 50,000 displaced children in IDP camps whom lack civil documentation. And also 1 in 5 households, even outside IDP camps, face similar issues with the children's civil documentations, and families previously under ISIS control often lack these documents because they lost them during ISIS, invasion and control. They were confiscated, they were destroyed, or they were, not renewed. So this lack of documentation is, significantly limits access to social services, but also becomes a big hinder or major barrier to enrolling children in school. And the Iraqi Ministry of Education directives mandate to arise, civil documents for students' registration, and that includes parents' IDs. And if the father is deceased, an official death certificate is required. But there are no provisions to address, a missing or detained father's absence in providing these documents. Yes, and also families who seek, new civil registration documents, they face significant challenges in doing this. Also, because of it's a security clearance that is required, and to receive the security clearance, they have to submit names, so their names to local intelligence forces for screening against suspected ISIS affiliations. And according to the civil status law, document renewal requires a return to the applicant's area, so they have to apply at the area of their origin, and this, of course, poses challenges for IDPs because they're already restricted in traveling to areas where ISIS previously had control. And there are also families.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I'm hoping to be able to elaborate later. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. If you want a last sentence to close, go ahead.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Okay, we'll leave it for the end. Okay, thank you, Delquoise.
Thank you.
Could I please invite Suzanne Clolau and Blessing Mutama from Family for Every Child to join us and present on birth registration, kinship care, and education experiences from South Africa and Zimbabwe, please. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks so much for having us. I'm just going to briefly give an overview of the global guidance on kinship care that we have worked on as Family for Every Child. And just to give a brief overview and introduction to why we're talking about kinship care and birth registration. If you could move to the next slide, please. So I won't go into detail, but this just shows that it was an extensive process that took place. Over 33 agencies have been involved, 25 countries, 196 children, and 215 kinship carers were consulted. Next slide, please. And what the guidance shows is that kinship care is a widely used form of care across the globe. And it's also preferred by many caregivers and children for care for children who are outside of parental care. It's been shown to have multiple benefits, including continuity, stability, a sense of identity, outcomes in terms of health and education and emotional well-being. Yet, kinship care is actually one of the least supported forms of care across the globe. So you heard earlier from Anne Skelton, who is a South African, and she mentioned that there have been some sort of very significant cases in law in South Africa around the registration of children. But our most recent shadow report to the UNCRC highlights that whilst we've had lots of legal precedent and whilst there's legislation in place, the implementation of that is still a challenge. I think there are about 18 million 18 million people in South Africa who are undocumented, of which about 3 million are children. And suggestions from research show that children in kinship care may be more at risk of being undocumented, and this is even more of a risk if one or other of their parents was also undocumented themselves. So I thought just to present a case study from South Africa that just highlights some of the challenges and how the lack of implementation of legislation sort of compounds those challenges. So we had a young lady called Phumzile. Her name's obviously been changed. She first came to us when she was 14 years old. But she was undocumented. She had no birth certificate. She was living with her paternal great aunt. And had been abandoned by her mother shortly after she was born. While she had been able to access primary school, thanks to the work of organizations like the Centre for Child Law, she was still given her caregiver was still given a hard time every time she would go to register at the beginning of the school year because she did not have her birth certificate. And many schools are resistant to this because even though the government was instructed to make sure that they made provisions for these children in their funding to the schools, they still don't do that. So many schools who accept children without birth certificates don't receive a subsidy for that particular child. Where it got very concerning for her was that she was going to be sitting her final exams, and although you can go all the way through school without a birth certificate and an ID document, you may not sit your school leaver exams without it. So she had applied in grade 8 when she was 11, thanks to the support of a very diligent social worker. But when she came to us, she'd been waiting over 2 years to receive notice of an interview for her late birth registration. So we then had to support her to access a new notice of birth, which required several visits to the hospital. The first visit, the clerk refused to support her because she would have to go downstairs to the document repository to fetch the certificate. So we then wrote a letter to say, please assist this lady. Again, not a legal requirement, but we kind of put some weight behind it, and then they did assist her. We referred her to the Centre for Child Law, and when she was in grade 11, she received her birth certificate. In grade 12, her ID document, and was finally able to sit her final leavers exam. I've taken quite a lot of the time. I'm going to hand over to my colleague from Zimbabwe, who's also just going to give a brief overview of the situation there.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Suzanne. Next slide, please. Yes, so in Zimbabwe, our registration system assigns a digital identifier to each person, which lasts for the duration of their life. So you'd realize that you can be, identified in any sector using that a digital identifier. And we have also realized that our registration rates have been increasing or have been rising over the past few years, although they are still very low, particularly when you compare the situation between the rural and the urban settings. The problem is largely pronounced among the rural dwellers and those that are in the farming communities. And we've realized that most families, they realize the importance of birth certificates when a child wants to access examinations in school. And over 90% of the OVCs in Zimbabwe are living in kinship care. And of these, over 60% are being taken care of by grandmothers. Next slide, please. So the factors associated with poor birth registration in Zimbabwe, they vary. I think you can see from the issues around unavailability of death certificates, issues around lack of access to offices, certain religious sects who are against going to hospitals, and in turn you find that children are being born in their home settings, and this usually attracts late registration fees. And also with the COVID pandemic, which caused some disruptions for the civil registry in Zimbabwe. Most children could not be registered between the period of April 2020 to September 2021. Can you go to the last slide, please? So in terms of our way forward in Zimbabwe, the government has launched a catch-up national mobile registrations exercises in 2022 and between May and August 2023. And NGOs are actually working in collaboration with UN agencies and the government department to strengthen decentralization and digitalization of birth registration. And we are also trying to strengthen the link between health and the civil registry. And we are trying to ensure that operation continuity of birth registration takes place in times of disasters. And I think from those pictures, you can see some of the work that is being done by UNICEF, which is playing quite a critical role in Zimbabwe in trying to strengthen decentralization and digitalization of birth registration. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both of you and for managing to keep on time. Our next speaker is Bridget Wooding. Bridget is joining us from the Observatory for Caribbean Migrants, and her presentation will focus on the documentation issues faced by persons of Haitian descent in the Dominican Republic. Bridget, you have the floor.
Thank you, Christiane. Good morning. A pleasure to present to you this morning on behalf of my organization, OBMICA, based in the Dominican Republic. In my presentation, I will first explain the situation of statelessness in the country. Secondly, note the effects of lack of documentation for stateless persons as regards education. And finally, suggest what might be done. Now, in 2013, a judgment of the Constitutional Tribunal in Santo Domingo unleashed a mass denationalization of Dominicans, mainly of Haitian ancestry. This builds on a century of Haitian labor migration to the neighboring DR and well-documented abuses of human rights of migrants and their descendants born in the Dominican Republic. Limited pushback was achieved by Dominican civil society organizations and their allies in so-called Naturalization Law 169. This was intended to remedy the situation for both those registered and who had been stripped of Dominican papers going back to 1929, and those never registered but who had the right to Dominican nationality under the Constitution when born. However, a study using official figures reveals that persons still affected by the sentence and its sequel total over 130,000 persons. The remedial legislation is inadequate, its application is slow, uneven, and subject to administrative obstructionism. So what are the effects of nationality stripping on access to education? Despite a central policy directive from the Education Ministry that all children should be eligible for public education independently of their documentary status, stateless persons of Haitian ancestry may be confused with undocumented Haitian migrants based on racial profiling and required to produce a birth certificate. But even if discrimination does not happen on access, final secondary school exam results would not be credited without a birth certificate, although they will be if the child has been registered in a so-called foreigner's book. This latter, however, is a kind of paper purgatory not leading to a birth certificate. Without a birth certificate, it is impossible to progress to tertiary education. Yesterday, I was in the community where we had interviewed Dianora in 2016 when she was 12 years old and stateless. She is now a young adult and fortunately has her papers and planning to go to university. When interviewed in 2016, she had pictured herself frowning and with God on one side of her drawing, and on the other side, Dianora smiling, and her dream of being a doctor realized. Her dreams are now achievable, not so yet for 80% of the children in this alternative primary school I was visiting yesterday who do not have birth certificates. Remember that Dianora, a pseudonym, was the poster girl for the ICI Global Survey of Childhood Statelessness in 2017. Now, there is also abuse for political gains. The extreme nationalist party had this tweet last week. Quote, Omar is not opposed to the massive registration of illegal Haitians without any documentation in public schools in the DR. He does not represent an option for the nationalist vote in this process, unquote. Omar is a new generation of younger politicians challenged by the extreme conservatives, remembering that undocumented Haitians may be erroneously conflated with denationalized Dominicans of Haitian ancestry. Universal access to education has been weaponized with extreme right in the upcoming general elections next year for party political purposes. And also, young persons may be expelled from their own country, as happened earlier this year, with one young person expelled twice before the UN intervened. So what may be done? First, include and disseminate information on the new law on civil registry. Second, address the issue of arbitrary discretion at the local level, which leads to exclusion from education based on documentation. Thirdly, ensure that state measures to address universal access to education do not incite xenophobia or racial discrimination. And finally, amplify the voice of young affected people widely in the media, leading to empathy and recalling that young people are the largest enfranchised demographic in the Dominican Republic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bridget, for sharing the situation in the Dominican Republic. And finally, let me give the floor to Najla, sorry for not pronouncing well, who is the Executive Director of Al-Ronak, Organization for Women and Children and Global Campaign for Equal Nationality Rights, who will be sharing her experiences on the obstacles in accessing education faced by children of Libyan women due to gender discrimination in the nationality law. Najla, you have the floor. Najla. I know you were there early on. Could the interpreters maybe help us? Yeah. Otherwise, we'll open the floor to a final question and then give the floor back to Niall. In the meantime, we can try to get in touch with her. In order to round up on this panel, except for the pending presentation, Could I please ask the speakers on this panel maybe to share their final words on what states should do to facilitate access to education for children in a situation of statelessness? Can I give the floor maybe first back to Carolina?
Yeah, thank you. I want to start very fast with the barriers that we face, and then very fast, like only like in 2020, the Observatory of Sexual and Reproductive Health reported more than 100,000 girls and adolescents in our country getting pregnant. This means 11 every hour. So children having children is a first barrier. Then lack of knowledge of how to register a child's birth, unaffordable fees for registering a birth or obtaining a birth certificate. Many people here in Guatemala, 52% of the population live under the line of poverty. This means that they earn less than $3 per day, and this certificate is $2 or $3. And if the fees for late registration are $3.50. There are long distances to the nearest registration facility, and traditional practices in some indigenous communities that, for example, new mothers stay indoors so that they cannot do the formal registration. There are language barriers. Low and middle income countries like ours have no reliable administrative records of birth, and children from certain ethnic groups are differently treated. This means discrimination in Guatemala, a very racist country. And the action from state is civil registration systems operating effectively and functioning are the main vehicles to achieve legal identity and provide vital statistics. So they are more and more should provide every child with a certificate upon birth and no later than 30 days after the event. But sometimes it fails. Sometimes it lasts months, and in some cases, like in Honduras, even years. Other actions from the state is to empower all parents, regardless of gender, to register their children at birth, to link birth registration to other systems to facilitate every child's right to services, including health, social protection, and education. Invest in safe and innovative technological solutions to facilitate birth registration. Engage community to demand birth registration for every child, using media to convey messages, involving children and encouraging them to participate as advocates for others, and create mobile registration projects to reach out the population. And why education is a bridge? This was my first question. There is a debate around requiring birth certificate to start school, because maybe this encourages or not encourages poor families to send their children to education. But education means opportunities, dignity, better or good employment, development, progressive autonomy, social mobility sometimes, and a better life. But the most important thing here in Guatemala is that it breaks the transgenerational chains of non-existing humans, because there are families that have mothers or fathers have not been registered, and so the grandparents, and so the children. So when it comes to birth registration and education, it breaks this chain.
Thank you, Carolina. And I can see we now have Naila with us. Naila, I'll give you the floor.
نعم أسمعك. نعم أسمعك. السلام عليكم. نجلاء فتحي الفارسي من دولة ليبيا، مدير تنفيذي لمنظمة الرونق للمرأة والطفل، ناشطة بحقوق المرأة، كذلك أحد الإدارات العليا للمجالس القومية بدولة ليبيا، أحد أعضاء حملة المساواة من حق الجنسية. أشكر وجودي بينكم، أشكركم جميعا، أشكر جميع الجهود المبذولة لإعطاء حق الأبناء المواطنات الجواز المختلط، ما يسمى في ليبيا بالجواز المختلط، حقوقهم. أتكلم عن حق التعليم في دولة ليبيا لأبناء المواطنات الليبيات المتزوجات من غير الليبي. في السنوات الأخيرة تم تحقيق خطوات مهمة في تعزيز حقوق الأطفال المولودين لأمهات ليبيات وأبناء غير ليبيين، والذي حرموا من جنسيات أمهاتهم بسبب التمييز بين الجنسين في القانون الليبي. أصدرت حكومة الوحدة الوطنية قرار مؤخرا في عام 2022، قرار 902، والذي ينص على حق المواطنة لأبناء الليبيات. وقد صدرت حكومة الوحدة الوطنية قرار يتضمن تمتع هؤلاء الأطفال بجميع الحقوق التي يتمتع بها المواطنين الليبيين، بما في ذلك حرية الوصول إلى التعليم. ومع ذلك لا تزال هذه الأسر تعاني من ذلك، بما في ذلك تعاني هؤلاء الأسر، ولا تزال هذه الأسر تعاني من ممارسة التمييز المستمر عليهم وعلى أطفالهم، بالإضافة إلى الحرمان من الجنسية نفسها. وتشمل التحديات الرئيسية للحصول على الشهادات التعليمية والتصديق عليها من الخارجيات، ونظرا لتفارقهم لعدم اكتسابهم الأم والذي تعمل به الدولة الليبية، وهذا الرقم الذي يصنف هو عجلة الدولة الليبية في النظام الحديث، حيث إنهم يقومون بتسجيل أبناء الليبيات بالرقم الوطني الذي يصنف رقم وطني الأم وليس رقمهم الوطني. باعتبارهم أجانب، يضطر هؤلاء الأطفال إلى الاعتماد على رقم الوطني لأمهاتهم الوصول إلى بياناتهم وإدخالها في منظومة التعليم أو النظام التعليمي، حيث لا يدخل بيانات الطالب بل تدخل بيانات عن طريق الأم، يدخل بيانات الطالب كاملة، إعطاء الطالب رقم الوطني للأم في الشهادات الإعدادية والثانوية، مما يؤدي إلى صعوبات كبيرة. علاوة على ذلك يواجه هؤلاء الأطفال كثير من الأحيان إلى التحييز داخل المدارس أو التنمر، من حيث يتم معاملتهم كغرباء أو غير ليبيين، ويؤثر هذا التمييز على صحتهم العقلية فحسب، بل يحد حتى من أطيهم الأكاديمية، حيث لا يرغبون في الذهاب إلى المدرسة، لا يرغبون في الدخول مع الأطفال المدارس العامة، يفضلون المدارس الخاصة وهي التي تكون فيها الأطفال والغير الليبيين مختلطة أكثر، ولا يتم فيها المدارس التعليم الخاص التنمر على الأطفال، لأن يوجد بها جاليات أجنبية. أما التعليم العام فالأغلب يكون من الليبيين، وهنا يتم التمييز بينهم أطفال ويتم التنمر عليهم. أيضا من كذلك وتستمر أوجه عدم المساواة هذه في تشكيل مساراتهم التعليمية وفرصهم المستقبلية، وهي محدودة بسبب التمييز بين الجنسين وحرمانهم من حقوقهم. كذلك صدرت منح دراسية لأبناء الليبيين وحرموا منها أبناء الليبيات، هذه المنحة تساعدهم على الدراسة. كذلك ما بعد الدراسة من جانب العمل، أبناء الليبية لا يستطيعون الدخول في مخاض العمل بسبب لا عدم وجود أرقام وطنية. إذا نعود إلى نقطة الصفر وهي التجنس. أبناء الليبية يجب أن يكونوا يكتسبوا جنسية الأم حتى يصبحوا يستطيعوا أن يتحصلوا على حقوقهم في الدولة الليبية. أما قرارات الحكومة التي تصدر مثل قرار 902 لسنة 2022 والذي يعطي حق المواطنة، قرار وزير العمل، كل هذه القرارات لا تنفذ على أرض الواقع. يوجد تنمر بين الأطفال بين الليبي والغير ليبي، حقية في التعليم كذلك يصنف أبناء الليبية من الطلبة الدرجة الثانية، يمنع من في أثناء النجاح من الشهادة الثانوية أبناء الليبية يمنعوا ينقص من حق من درجاتهم ومستواهم التعليمي في دخولهم إلى الجامعة، وهنا يكون التفريق العنصري بينهم. لا يدخلوا الجامعات إلا بعد دخول أبناء الليبيين أولا، ثم يتم النظر إلى أبناء الليبيات. شكرا لكم جميعا. نبذة مختصرة عن التعليم وأبناء ما يعانوه أبناء المواطنات الليبيات من التعليم في ليبيا. أحييكم جميعا، ونتأسف إني خرجت عن نطاق الزمن المحدد لي. تحياتي لكم جميعا. ممتاز. باقي.
Thank you very much, Najla, for sharing the experience in Libya. We can now go back to the final discussions. We have received a few questions, which I will now share with all the speakers. Please feel free to answer them individually or together. I know, Bridget, let me maybe go back to the same order. I mean, we heard from Carolina already on these final questions. The questions are, what is the difference between the concepts of unregistered and stateless? Also, what value do you see in joint actions, greater collaboration, peer learning, and global advocacy efforts to achieve the goal of inclusive education for children and communities you're working with? And we can also, if you wish, to answer the more general question, which I had put out to you about what should states do to facilitate access to education for stateless children. So, Delquoise, would you like to share your final comments with us? No, if Delquoise is still with us at this point. Otherwise, I'll give the floor to Suzanne and Blessing.
Thank you. Sorry,
Suzanne.
little
No
technical
problem.
difficulty.
No problem.
So maybe just to answer the question around what we can hold states accountable for, I think Christina mentioned quite a few of them already, but I would also say to make sure that the recognition of children's identity is not contingent on their parent being registered firstly. Also to make that equally accessible to both parents. So in South Africa, the regulations for a father to register their child are much harder than it is for a mother to register their child. And then also, if we allow alternative forms of documentation, for example, to allow you to access education, that should follow through the whole system and shouldn't then prevent you from sitting your final leavers exam. So to make sure that that's streamlined across all the systems. I think that's just from my side, from our local context. I'll hand over to Blessing in case you would like to add some more.
Yeah, so maybe from me, I think it's important, you know, when we are talking about this specific group of children that are in need of this assistance. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I was hearing some background noise. Anyway, that's fine.
Yes.
That they try and put some form of waiver, you know, for children to be able to easily access this documentation. And also, I think it's important to, like, from my context, that decentralization is strengthened of birth registration. This will help to increase, you know, access of children. Like in Zimbabwe recently, I think UNICEF has been supporting traditional leaders to be capacitated to play their role in creating awareness, in terms of the need for or the importance for children to make sure that their children are registered, and also mobilizing their communities to come and register children. And they are also being trained on how to provide what they call a birth registration notification, so that we increase access of children who would have been maybe born, within the communities, not within the hospital or clinic setups. Then also it's important that we strengthen the links between, our health system and civil registry, because we are saying when parents, go to the hospitals or to the clinics to deliver the children, the moment that they step out of the hospital, they should step out, with the registration certificate for the child. I think these are some of the things that would help to ensure that children, when they grow, they will now be able to, to access education without any of those barriers. Because in most cases, we've realized that parents really think about this when the child wants to participate in sporting activities, and then they are required to produce a birth certificate, or when the child wants to write their examination, then the child is expected to produce their birth certificate. So they then face those challenges. Yeah, I think this is what I can share from our context. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne and Blessing. Bridget, I know you wanted to answer one particular question which caught your attention on the chat.
Thank you. Yes, perhaps I'll start with the joint action and then move on to state responsibility, because I think the things in our context are quite linked. I think joint action, global action is really important. And in our context, one of the things that has drawn attention to the issues has been strategic litigation, since very important litigation on the rights of 2 young children to have their documentation and hence be able to go to normal schooling happened in 2005. And at that time, for example, the witness brought by the state was unable to explain what the rules and regulations were for late birth declaration, even though she'd been brought on their behalf, because they were so complicated. I think we've moved on a long way since then, and because of using to such a great extent the treaty, all the treaty bodies, we managed to generate more recommendations on the civil registry in the Dominican Republic than any other country in the world. And that eventually has produced a new civil registry, a new law on the civil registry, which just came in earlier this year. So I think all this kind of joined up action has had results in that it should be relatively easier for those with the right to Dominican nationality to access that nationality. However, of course, in country, making states accountable, there are 2 other things that need to happen. One of which is then doesn't just need to be the law. There also need to be the rules of procedure on that, which we don't yet have. We need to ensure that those people administering the law in the civil registry offices really understand what the changes mean and how to implement them. And above all, that those people at the community level are informed about what this new law means in terms of their real case histories. And it was quite clear from the meeting we had yesterday in the community that none of the mothers we were talking to actually knew anything about the new law and the implications for possibly getting birth registration for the children and being able to access education. So yeah, I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bridget. Before we close, I don't know if Delquas is still there or if Najla would like to add anything on these questions. Both, please feel free to get on board.
Yes, thank you, Christina.
Delquas, go ahead.
I'm so sorry, I can still not hear you, but I'm getting a message that you're calling on me.
Yes.
Is it okay that I proceed?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Okay, great. So maybe just very quickly, to also conclude my intervention just for you, to have a clear idea about the situation in Iraq. So there are almost 50,000 children in Iraq lacking, legal identity, but there are also many more thousand who, are able to renew their civil documentation, but there are that are still not able to, go back to school because they have years of gap of school. So that's two different reasons that children in Iraq are not able to access education, and this is of course that children born of rape are particularly vulnerable in this category because they're on top of all these challenges also stigmatized within the society and within their communities. There are some changes, within the Iraq, policies changes the past couple of years, but they are not enough to tackle the outspread, problem. So there is a lot that states, can do, civil society, community, religious leaders, but maybe just to mention what the state of Iraq can do, but this also applies, to other countries and other contexts, and that's to ensure that all these children, are, that they have their identity documented, but that also that they really streamline and ease the administrative burden that is usually involved in the process of receiving civil documentation, and that especially for children born of rape. If I can just have one more minute, I will give one more recommendation, which that would be to really enact amendments to all relevant Iraqi laws so that also Yazidi, but also from other minorities are able to with children born of sexual violence during ISIS captivity are able to choose their religion, but also the religion of their children in their civil documentation. Another recommendation would be to also provide this category with legal and financial assistance, and again especially for children born of CRSV, and to facilitate the process of obtaining civil documents. I'm sorry if I took too long, but I can really not hear you, Christina, still.
No worry. Thank you.
Christina, it was a question about apatridia, stateless.
Yes.
The difference between having this and this condition or lack of birth registration. And being undocumented is not the same as being stateless. And however, lack of birth registration can put people at risk of statelessness as birth. A certificate provides proof of where a person was born and parentage key information needed to establish a nationality. So these are not the same thing. And I just wanted to answer that. Sorry.
Thank you for answering the question, Carolina. And finally, Najla, would you like to briefly add anything before we conclude this first panel?
نعم 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 معك نسمع. كذلك في الجنوب عندي بعض النقاط حابة نطرحها، وهي بداية تسجيل الأبناء في ليبيا عند دخوله العام الدراسي. يوجد أبناء مواطنات ليبيات يتم لا يوجد لديهم شهادات ميلاد أصلية فقط بواقعة الولادة، لأن الأب غادر ليبيا أو لأن الزواج لم يستمر، ولا توجد سفارات لهذا الأب حتى الأم تلجأ إليها واستخراج شهادة ميلاد لابنها من السفارة. كذلك يوجد لدينا مشاكل مثل الأطفال العراقيين، أبناء العراقيين، أبناء السوريين، أبناء الموريتانيين. يوجد بعض الفئات من هذه الجنسيات، أقصد من هؤلاء الأطفال، يوجد لدينا عراقيل لأن لا توجد لدينا سفارات لاستخراج شهاداتهم. وهنا الابن يدرس من الصف، يدخل المدرسة بشهادة واقعة الولادة حتى يصل الصف الثالث ابتدائي ثم لا يستمر في الدراسة. يوجد الكثير في الجنوب الليبي لم يدرسوا أطفال ليبيات بسبب الأوراق وعدم ثبوتية الجنسية من دولة الأب وعدم ثبوتية أوراقه في دولة الأم. هنا لم يتحصل الابن على حقه في التعليم بسبب الأوراق الرسمية وصعوبتها في دولة ليبيا. كذلك عندنا الأبناء اللي هم العائدون، وهم يعتبروا من البدون، لا يعائدون من الدول الجوار، هم ليبيين الأصل ولكن ليست لديهم أوراق ثبوتية تثبت بأنهم هم ليبيون. هنا يعانون مشكلة البدون، ليس لديهم ما يثبت أوراق ثبوتية، وهنا لم يتم تسجيلهم. ومن كانوا مسجلين في الدولة يتم إيقافهم بسبب الأرقام الوطنية التي صدرت مؤخرا، وتم إيقاف من كان يعمل من والد الطفل وهو ليبي الجنسية ولكن عائد بدون. كذلك أطفالهم لم يتم تكملة تعليمهم وإيقافهم عن الدراسة إلى وقتنا الحالي. قرارات التي تصدر من الحكومة تصدر ولكن لم تنفذ على أرض الواقع، تنفذ في الحكومة فقط. فيوجد ظلم على أبناء المواطنات الليبيات، وهؤلاء الفئة من الأطفال أتمنى أن تكون يوجد حلقة وصل بيننا وبين هذه الحكومات حتى يتم تفعيل قرارات وتسهيل الإجراءات الإدارية لدخول هؤلاء الأطفال إلى المدارس. ما بعد الحروب عانت ليبيا وعانى الجنوب الليبي وعانت المدن التي كانت بها داعش، والتي لم يتم تكميل هؤلاء الأبناء دراساتهم، أطفال هؤلاء الأطفال دراساتهم بسبب الحروب وبسبب ضياع أوراقهم وبسبب ضياع مستنداتهم من بيوتهم التي دمرت في الحرب. الآن ليبيا تتعافى ولكن الأطفال لم يتعافوا، وهذه الأسر التي حرقت بيوتهم أو دمرت ليس لديهم ثبوتيات وليس لديهم دولة سفارات في ليبيا حتى يثبتوا أوراقهم. شكرا لكم، أعتذر عن التأخير. شكرا لإصغائكم، وكما ذكرت سالم أتمنى أن تكون هناك حلقة وصل بيننا وبين الحكومات. شكرا.
Christina, you are on mute.
Sorry about that. I was thanking all the speakers for having shared their experiences of work and practice in the different countries and regions. And we would like to invite you to a very brief 2-minute break before starting the next panel. Thank you very much. Over to you, Mia and Danisha.
Hi, thank you so much, Christina. We're actually going to break for about 5 minutes. And so if everyone can come back in 5 minutes time, we'll restart with the second session. Thank you. welcome back to everyone who's joining us today. I hope you enjoyed that short intermission where we were able to showcase quite a lot of the incredible work that our partners have been doing all over the world to celebrate and engage with children around the Awareness Month on Childhood Statelessness and Education. My name is Denisha Moss. I lead the children's program at the Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion, and I'm happy to be your moderator for this session, which is a little bit forward-thinking now and looking at some of the best practices that have emerged in trying to address some of the challenges that exist for children who lack identity documentation and also nationality. So just before getting started, I would like to remind you, for those who may have just joined, that we do have interpretation available. And so if you look at the bottom of your screen on the world icon, you can click on the language you require. Spanish is, of course, in Spanish, and for Arabic interpretation, please click the German button. And then, of course, as our speakers are speaking in different languages, you can click on the English button to have that translated. I would like to now go ahead and invite Dr. Lara Van Was, who is one of the co-directors at the Institute on Statelessness and Inclusion, to provide some context and opening remarks for this second session. Laura, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nisha, and thank you for inviting me to share some remarks at the opening of the session. As you already know, we're all here today because we're concerned about the state of implementation of two fundamental child rights: the right to identity, including nationality, and the right to education. Both are protected in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Both are enabling rights. Where either is violated, there's a negative impact on the child's enjoyment of other rights. And as we heard in the first session of today's symposium, the two rights also have a really strong interaction. A child without identity, including nationality, will face many barriers to fulfilling their right to education. And a child denied an education may be less equipped to advocate for their right to identity and nationality. So the question before us now is this: how do we unpack this nexus and design interventions that promote the right to education for children lacking identity? And also, how can education help to promote the agency of children to achieve their right to nationality? Now, these are really big questions for us to discuss, but to kick things off, let me offer an insight into the Awareness Month on Childhood Statelessness and Education that forms the backdrop for this symposium. This initiative offers an example of joined-up action that combines the power of localized projects with global advocacy, that engages children with and without nationality in a conversation about rights and belonging, and that challenges us all to really scrutinize and commit to what is needed to ensure that any agenda for inclusive education also includes stateless children. The Awareness Month has brought together partners from across the globe who share a commitment to breaking down the systemic discrimination that stateless children face in accessing education. In the lead up to this joint action, we met to share and collate information about the barriers that exist in different places and for different communities. Together, we identified what needs to change, and this formed the foundation for the appeal that is at the heart of the Awareness Month, articulated in the open letter on inclusive education for stateless children, and that has since attracted many more supporters. You can still sign and share the letter if you've yet to do so. To raise the visibility of the issue, to bring children into the conversation about change, and to showcase what's possible, local projects have been carried out to mark the Awareness Month across 12 countries: Australia, Bangladesh, the Dominican Republic, India, Iraq, Kenya, Malaysia, North Macedonia, Nepal, the Netherlands, Pakistan, and the United Kingdom. These have involved everything from capacity building workshops for affected communities, civil society and education practitioners, to engaging children through art, theatre, and multimedia, and from direct advocacy with government agencies to research initiatives that add texture to our understanding of the problem and its impact on children. The slideshow that was shown between the sessions of today's symposium offer a glimpse of the diversity and the creativity of these projects, all of which share the common goal of making the issue more tangible and building towards meaningfully inclusive education for stateless children. What stands out to me in the reflections shared, and in particular in the creative works of children who've participated in some way in these activities, is how straightforward the issue actually is when all the jargon is stripped away. Excluding children from school or disadvantaging them in their education because they lack nationality or documents is a grave injustice. There is no rationalization, no justification, no need. We can do better. And so, I urge you to listen attentively to the speakers that follow and to think about what you can draw from the experiences that they share. Awareness is important, but ultimately the Awareness Month aims to do more than engage interest or generate dialogue. Any commitment to inclusive education must be inclusive of stateless children. So by bringing together different stakeholders to share their respective experiences, local and international, civil society, UN and state perspectives, this symposium can help us to set the course for the work that lies ahead. Listen carefully. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm really happy to be able to now open this part of the symposium. And as I mentioned, we have an impressive list of speakers for this session. I would like to first introduce Ms. Tahira Hassan, who's one of the founders of Imkan Welfare Organization, which is an organization that works with stateless children in Karachi in Pakistan. Tahira is going to talk to us about the work that her organization does to facilitate access to education for stateless children. Tahira, over to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We work in Karachi, Pakistan, and most of the stateless population is in Karachi, and we work predominantly with ethnic Bengali and Bihari populations. Could we move the slide up, please? So we were an organization that was founded in 2012, and as I mentioned, we work in stateless communities. We run multiple projects and interventions. And, at the core of our work is child welfare. So we do have services in education and mother and child health care, maternal health, mental health, recreational sports, solid waste management. We have legal services, and we recently started working with women, providing a safe space as a community center for them, where they can learn and develop their skills and have a safe space to engage with each other. Could we go on to the a project that deals predominantly with children is called Khel, which means play in Urdu. And one of the things that's important to understand about Pakistan is the fact that we have a constitutional guarantee that all children in Pakistan, irrespective of their citizenship status, shall be given the right to education. The issue that we face is one of an implementation gap. And there is also a huge undocumented population of children in addition to the stateless children. And that left us in a situation where, working in these slums, we had to come up with ideas where we could engage with children and provide them some form of education, some form of learning, which could take them on to different avenues in the meantime, prior to there being any access to education as far as they're concerned. So Khel basically has nurtured children for the last 9 to 10 years, and we have provided an environment where we have children of different ethnic backgrounds, and they've been given a safe space to learn. One of the things that we've done is have an informal schooling system within the recreational center, which gets children ready to be able to go to school when the chance does arise, rather than having a gap of having children that have never been to school and not being able to integrate them later on into the high school schooling system. Could we go on to the next slide, please? The other thing that we've done is that, while looking at different kinds of interventions, because we're running different programs right now, we've been able to use those programs and the expertise in each one of them to be able to access different kinds of children and youth, to train them for different things. So the mental health clinic also has provided a lot of support. We've had group discussions. We've talked about empowerment. We've talked about how to manage stress, how to do public speaking, career development. We've taught them about their legal rights. And through these interventions, there has been a building of learning, of confidence, and of being able to consider yourself in a position where you are worth something, rather than the situation that they have been in over a period of time. One of the other things we've been doing is, we've engaged a lot with our mainstream media in Pakistan. And prior to our work on stateless communities in Pakistan, this was a completely neglected area, even though the issue of statelessness has existed in Pakistan since 1971. Where we've had our learning and recreation center that has given people a space to grow and to be able to have impact, to be able to take part in sports, and some of the children have gone on to even play at the national level, where we've been able to bypass the identity issue due to the fact that they had the expertise and the talent that they had to be able to represent the different provinces. Now, these children have been able to talk to the media and to be raising their own voices to get across their challenges. So that has been a very powerful thing that has happened, which prior to this was a challenge. One of the other things that we recently have been working on was a community ownership for the children, because if you go into the areas that we work in, they're completely neglected by the state. There's been no intervention in terms of the environment, in terms of solid waste management programs or collection of garbage. And if you see the environment, it can be very depressing and dismal. So one of the things that we did do was to have foster a sense of responsibility and empowerment, where children and young people came together to, for example, paint the entire lane that we work in, to take ownership of the space. So there was a whole project that dealt with cleanliness, that dealt with beautifying. There were murals that were painted by local artists. Therefore, showing them and showing other people within the community that if people do get together and if the youth do get together, they can have an impact on their environment, and that we don't need to always be waiting for somebody else to come in and to make that change for us. Another very important component of the work that we've been doing has been through the mental health clinic, which has been for engagement for out-of-school children. So within the Learning and Recreational Center, of course, we have only so much space to be able to absorb, this particular slum is one of 800,000 people, and we can only absorb X number of students into that. One of the other things we've been doing through the mental health clinic has been to have engagements with out-of-school children, where children come in regularly twice a week to attend sessions at the mental health clinic, where you talk about mental health issues, how to cope with life. There's free play. We look at educational videos. There's behavior coaching, and if they need one-on-one counseling or therapy, they have access to that also. This summer, we decided to try something different, which was a summer art program. So we ran that, and it was very interesting. We had a lot of children coming in for that, and to be able to creatively express themselves and to have fun out of it. And at the same time, women and young girls had an opportunity to come together in a safe space where they learned henna designs, mehndi designs, and these are things that can teach them and give them opportunities of moving on and having economic empowerment. The last thing I'd like to add is that we have a community center for women also, and that works with providing a safe space for recreation for women, learning for women in terms of skill set that they can use while being at home, and entertainment. So that is what we're looking at, and awareness and learning. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tahira, for sharing all the amazing work that MCAN is doing with children in Pakistan. You were a little bit muffled when you were speaking, but we were able to read your slides. And so I just want to remind people as well, if you have any questions for Tahira and also for our other speakers, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A, and we will address them at the end. I would like to now call on Oluyemi Elaru, who works at Child Lifeline, which is an organization in Nigeria that helps to help children who are undocumented to obtain birth registration and other documents to enable them to go to school. Oluyemi, over to you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and good evening. I'm Oluyemi Elaru, the Program Manager, Child Lifeline. Next slide, please. The African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. The committee defined birth registration as the official recording of the birth of a child by administrative level, coordinated administrative level of the state, and by a particular branch of government. And also Article 6 of the African Children Charter provides that every child shall be registered immediately after birth. For the right to birth registration to be effective, the committee holds that it must be universal, it must be free and accessible and made available for these children immediately after birth. In Nigeria, birth identity is a major requirement for a child to be enrolled into school. The admission placement requires that a child should submit birth registration certificate as part of document to be submitted upon resumption. This means that a child without birth identity will not have access to education. Despite the fact that education is universally free, I'm still on first slide, please. I'm still on first slide. Despite the fact that education is universally free, they declared free in Nigeria according to the policy of education. But we find out that some underground requirements will not even make education free as pronounced by the government of Nigeria. How do I mean? Hence the reason Child Lifeline went into action, and we made it part of our policy to obtain birth certificate for all children or under our care, irrespective of their background, because it should be a free legal document that must be free, number one, universal and accessible. This becomes a driving force for us in Child Lifeline. So in 2020, when Child Lifeline was to start a project called Back to School, Oworo Back to School project, sponsored by Red Nose Day in collaboration with Consortium for Street Children. Where we are to place back to school children who dropped out of school and children who could not access education because of one requirement or the other, which birth identity was part of it. We discovered that many of the children that we want to place back to school or enroll in school do not even have birth certificates. Because of, and why? We realize that many parents are lavishing in poverty. They cannot afford the fee that government attached to it, maybe a token of $2. The use of, another one is ignorance on the part of parents, then the use of traditional birth attendants instead of going through government hospital for delivery. We were faced with a big challenge to obtain birth. We can now go to the next slide, please. We were faced with a big challenge to obtain birth certificate for the children so that the children can have access to education. How did we resolve this challenge in Nigeria or in Child Lifeline? What did we do and how did we do it better that we made the government to know that it's part of something they're supposed to provide for children irrespective of their status? Number one, advocacy. Advocacy visit to National Population Commission, letter requesting the document stating clearly that it's a fundamental right under the Child Rights Act and Article 7 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Children. Several follow-ups. We started going there almost on a daily basis. Invitation, then after that we made them, we enlightened them, we made them to know that it's a document that should be given to the children free of charge, because when we approached them, they asked us to bring money. And by the time we calculated the money, it was even more than what we wanted to use to support the children, to place them back to school. So we started with them through advocacy, through writing of letters, follow-up. After a series of meetings, we stood our ground because they said we have to pay that fee of something like $2. The timeline in the process even affected the children in resuming with other children. Then we after that, we did a kind of, follow-up, strengthen the relationship with the government. Then the children were presented and their parents as a requirement by the commission. National Population Commission, at the end of the day, issued the birth certificate to all children concerned. Let's go to slide 3. Then we can see example of what birth certificates issued by National Population Commission in Nigeria. Photo speaks. Then school placement for beneficiary. How did we do it? CLL having secured the required document, that is birth identity and Lagos State resident registration, they call it LASTRA, for all the children concerned. We collaborated with State Universal Basic Education Board in placing the beneficiaries into state primary and secondary schools in Oworo community. The collaboration through advocacy helped to get placement fee waiver for all the children we place back to school. We follow up on the list to ensure school placement was done in due time. Having achieved the school registration document, all beneficiaries were presented for placement, were placed back to school in various schools within that local community. Next slide. Yes, now we go to Child Lifeline good practices. We need to talk more on this. What did we do in Child Lifeline? We advocated. Number one is advocacy. This we keyed into by making governments and necessary stakeholders to be responsible for the documents. We advocated for the rights of the children, especially street-connected children in Lagos, to get this document. Through advocacy, we made governments to know that it should be provided for the children, for all children. And we let them know what the article says, the Child Rights Act law says about obtaining child birth registration for the children through enlightenment and reorientation. CLL was able to engage stakeholders too, relevant stakeholders. We engage them to let them know that it's something that we all should provide for the children. We advocated on the behalf of these children through relevant ministries by visiting the National Population Commission. That is the commission in charge of the birth registration. We advocated by visiting the Ministry of Youth and Social Development. We wrote several letters to them. Then State Universal Basic Education, we advocated to them by visiting them. We told them our stand, how this document should be provided for the children without any fee, and it should be made free to all children. Apart from that, we persisted. It wasn't an easy journey. I want to say this, there was persistency in telling the government authorities that this document should be provided. We reminded them of the need to provide this document, and irrespective of the background of the child. And we made our stand, we made our stand to be known. We stood our ground. And it was not an easy task, like I said, but because we persisted through advocacy, through enlightenment, through reorientation, through involvement of stakeholders, we were able to break that bottleneck. The children under our care were given birth certificates to be enrolled in school, and presently we have placed back over 100 children in Oworo community. Myself and my team were able to do this without paying a dime. We got the document free of charge for all the children that we presented. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oliami. It's really very encouraging and always powerful to hear how civil society organizations and local organizations who are often on the front line of these challenges are able to, like you say, through persistence, really make a difference on the ground for children who are affected by these challenges. So thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you.
We are going to switch gears a little bit now because we're going to hear from UNICEF to understand how larger institutions have been using innovative approaches to tackle also this issue of lack of documentation, in particular where it impacts a child's right to education. So I'm pleased to welcome Bhaskar Mishra, who is a legal identity specialist with UNICEF. And he also works as a part of the Civil Registration and Vital Statistics team based in UNICEF's headquarters in New York. His bio, as all other bios, will be shared in the chat function. And Bhaskar, happy to turn over to you.
Thanks, Denisa. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Bhaskar.
Oh, thanks. The right to education and universal birth registration complement each other, and their fulfillment is critical from both human rights and development perspectives. Nonetheless, complicated, cumbersome, and costly late and delayed registration processes and making birth certificate compulsory for school enrollments, as we see in several countries, without sorting out supply-side issues, have made the two systems look competing and at times conflicting. To ensure every child has a birth certificate and equal and undeniable access to education, twinning between birth registration and education is a non-negotiable priority for UNICEF, and it should be for others as well. Twinning between birth registration and education is essential for the birth registration and legal identity for the 5 to 17 cohort, and is a natural sequel to the twinning between birth registration and health, which primarily focuses on newborns and children aged 1 to 4. Ideally, both should take place simultaneously to create this stock, which is the coverage rate for newborns, and maintain the flow by registering all newborns and clearing the existing backlog for children 1 to 17. Before going into the strategies, let's look at the compelling rationale behind the convergence of these two sectors. I will enumerate a couple of them. First, in the health, birth registration, education, social protection, national ID pathway, which forms the base of the ID ecosystem in a country, schools act as the natural contact point for children 5 to 17, which account for 22% of the total population globally. In absolute numbers, this is more than 1.7 billion population. And for such a significant cohort, there is hardly much data. What is available is scattered and fragmented with no global estimates. Even the World Bank ID4D database for legal identity applies the under 5 birth registration rate for this age group. Fewer than 40 countries have birth registration data for 5 to 17 from demographic health surveys and population censuses, and in most cases, they are just one data points. On the human rights front, girls and boys of this age group are in the most urgent need of a birth certificate for a plethora of reasons, including proof of age for protection against child marriage, child labor, etc. Coming to CRC, there are at least 10 articles that may require birth registration for their fulfillment, and the right to education is the most prominent one. Noting the importance of education and birth registration globally, as well as the need to address barriers in both areas, specific targets in the Sustainable Development Agenda address the elimination of all discrimination in education through Target 4.5 and universal birth registration through Target 16.9. On the operational side, which is the most critical for this integration or twinning, convergence at service delivery point will address the core issues of accessibility and affordability for the late and delayed registration processes. We heard how late and delayed registration processes are difficult in several presentations. On-site facilitation or registration will address the denial of admission into schools for lack of a birth certificate by providing a wider window for registration and certification from 6 months to 1 year. So the idea is to register a baby and issue a birth certificate by the time he or she graduates from one class to another. Now let's see how schools can help improve the uptake of birth registration. And this can be done in 4 ways. First, identifying left out children, referring them to civil registration authorities, or even facilitating birth registration for first children. This is a systemic way to validate the claims of civil registration agencies about their coverage rates and critical for creating the stock and maintaining the flow. Second, clearing the backlog of unregistered children aged 5 to 17 in a systematic, cost-effective, and time-bound manner. Using schools for backlog clearance has innumerable advantages in terms of reach, cost, and data quality. Regrettably, ad hoc birth registration campaigns have become a new norm, and they inhibit the motivation for registration at birth. Third, most importantly, the backlog of out-of-school children residing in the catchment areas of schools can also be cleared through this route. The schools can also be used for national ID registration for 5 to 17, as countries have started issuing national ID numbers from age 0 onwards. This can be clubbed with the birth registration exercise. In terms of facilitation for birth registration, there are different models depending upon the legal context and other practical considerations in a country. A. Schools can facilitate this by identifying unregistered children, helping them fill out the birth registration forms, and sending these forms to civil registration offices. Certificates can be sent back to children through schools. B. School teachers can be declared as informants, making the system proactive. Third, school teachers, especially the head teacher, is declared as a sub-registrar for a couple of months every year to register and issue birth certificates on site. When I was the Deputy Registrar General India, I used to use this very often to clear the backlog, and this turned out to be very successful. Nevertheless, the success of such engagements will depend upon A. Simplification of late and delayed registration processes, waiving the fees and fines for late and delayed registration, relaxing the norms for documentation, especially the need for judicial resolutions, and relying on other documents such as health records, clearing the backlog in a given time frame, say in 2 to 3 years, rather than making this as a perpetual cycle, like as we see in most countries. And finally, the extent of digitalization in civil registration and education sectors. Let me give you some country examples. Bangladesh has used schools to clear the backlog of unregistered children and create the stock for national ID. So far, the birth registration backlog has been cleared for more than 30 million children, and UIDs issued for more than 5 million children. But the worrying factor in Bangladesh is low stock. 50% of underones are registered, and consequently, the backlog continues to be generated. Tanzania has used the facilitation route for clearing the backlog of thousands of children. Ivory Coast has been registering the birth of about 400,000 children in schools in the regions with lowest registration rates every year for the past 3 to 4 years. India used schools to clear the backlog in several states between 2002 and 2006. Senegal, Cameroon, and several more countries are using this approach. The Education IMS collects data on unregistered children both in Senegal and Cameroon. Let me make 2 suggestions before I conclude. First, countries should prioritize establishing a health, birth registration, education, social protection, national ID pathway. This will entail 2 advantages: collecting information once and using it multiple times, and moving information, not people. Start collecting birth registration data for 5 to 17, also through demographic health surveys, mix, and population censuses to expand the evidence base from nationally representative sources. Thank you. Over to you, Denisa.
Thank you so much, Bhaskar. That was really interesting to hear some of the concrete steps in which states can take to, or not states, but like educational institutions can take to ensure that they capture the unregistered population of children. I think it's really important to highlight that. And also I mean, we had a question earlier that asked about, statelessness and undocumented children. And while there is a slight difference, because not all children who are undocumented are stateless is important to highlight that. And therefore, different challenges exist. But thank you very much for showing at least how children who are outside of the system due to lack of documentation can absolutely be included through school registration. I would like to move on to our final speaker for this particular session. I'm happy to welcome Omar Bielma Velasquez, who is the third secretary and human rights delegate for the permanent mission of Mexico to the UN office in Geneva. And he will be sharing with us his experiences on engaging the Human Rights Council to advance right to nationality for children. Welcome, Omar. I look forward to hearing you talk about what you have done and some of the good practices that you've been a part of that help address these issues.
Thank you very much, Denisha. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Omar Bielma. So as Denisha was saying, I'm a human rights delegate here at the Permanent Mission of Mexico in Geneva, and I thank Child Identity Protection and the Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion for the invitation. Usually, I don't have that many opportunities to speak in Spanish, so I will allow myself to make my presentation in my language. ¿Me pueden escuchar? Can you hear me again?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm not sure what it was. Bueno, estaba comentando que me gustaría abordar la resolución sobre la inscripción de los nacimientos y el derecho de todo ser humano al reconocimiento en todas partes de su personalidad jurídica, para complementar las presentaciones que ya hemos tenido, pero ahora un poco desde la perspectiva del Estado en el ámbito multilateral. Esta resolución sobre inscripción de los nacimientos se presenta de manera periódica en el Consejo de Derechos Humanos desde hace alrededor de 10 años. La resolución es presentada conjuntamente entre México y Turquía y actualmente tiene una periodicidad trienal. México funge como pen holder de la resolución, es decir, es el país que redacta el borrador, que coordina las consultas con las diversas partes interesadas en el proceso, que dirige las negociaciones con los Estados miembros y observadores del Consejo de Derechos Humanos. El 4 de abril de este año, de 2023, el Consejo adoptó en su 22ª sesión la versión más reciente de la resolución sobre inscripción de los nacimientos bajo la asignatura A/HRC/Res 52/25. Voy a colocar el link también en el chat en algún momento. Y esta resolución contó con 61 estados copatrocinadores de todos los grupos regionales, es decir, 61 estados que respaldan este texto. Durante el proceso de redacción y negociación, recibimos el valioso apoyo de diversas personas y organizaciones que están presentes en este simposio, incluyendo a UNICEF, a la Oficina del Alto Comisionado de Naciones Unidas para Refugiados, al Alto Comisionado de Naciones Unidas para Derechos Humanos, las organizaciones Child Identity Protection y el Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion, a quienes aprovecho aquí para agradecer también por la colaboración. En términos generales, la resolución señala que el registro de nacimiento es fundamental para garantizar el derecho de todo ser humano al reconocimiento de su personalidad jurídica, el cual es un derecho consagrado en diversos instrumentos internacionales como la Declaración Universal de Derechos Humanos, el Pacto Internacional de Derechos Civiles y Políticos, la Convención sobre los Derechos del Niño, entre otras. Y además, al ser un derecho humano, conlleva la correlativa obligación de los estados de llevar a cabo la inscripción del nacimiento de todos los niños inmediatamente después de su nacimiento, sin discriminación alguna, conforme a instrumentos, algunos de los ya citados, como el Pacto Internacional de Derechos Civiles y Políticos y la Convención sobre los Derechos del Niño. En ese sentido, La resolución adoptada por el Consejo de Derechos Humanos subraya que la inscripción de los nacimientos y el reconocimiento de la personalidad jurídica están estrechamente vinculados con el ejercicio efectivo de otros derechos humanos. Por ejemplo, como ya lo han señalado otros panelistas de este simposio, un acta de nacimiento permite dejar constancia de la existencia de una persona y de su vínculo con un Estado, por lo que está estrechamente ligada con el derecho a la nacionalidad y la reducción de la apatridia. Por lo anterior, la última versión de la resolución sobre registro de los nacimientos, adoptada en abril pasado, incluyó algunos aspectos específicos para fortalecer su contenido con relación a las versiones anteriores de la resolución y para avanzar los estándares internacionales en la materia. Y en este sentido quisiera destacar 3 aspectos. En primer lugar, la resolución 52/25 hace énfasis no solo en la inscripción de los nacimientos, sino también en la expedición de los certificados de nacimiento. Esto debido a que en el mundo hay alrededor de 70 millones de niños menores de 5 años que sí están registrados, pero que no cuentan con prueba documental de ello. Si un niño no cuenta con un acta de nacimiento, a pesar de estar formalmente registrado, el ejercicio de sus derechos humanos y el acceso a numerosos servicios, entre ellos el de la educación, por ejemplo, puede verse obstaculizado. En segundo lugar, la resolución también aborda la discriminación de género con respecto a leyes de nacionalidad y requisitos del registro civil. Esto se refiere a leyes que exigen que las mujeres cambien de nacionalidad al contraer matrimonio, leyes que niegan a las mujeres la posibilidad de transmitir la nacionalidad o que impidan a las mujeres solteras inscribir el nacimiento de sus hijos. En tercer lugar, la resolución incluyó también un nuevo párrafo operativo 5D en el que exhorta a los estados a reforzar la interoperabilidad y los vínculos con otros sectores, en particular los de la salud, la educación y la protección social, a fin de garantizar el registro inmediato de los nacimientos en los establecimientos de salud y facilitar mecanismos que permitan a los niños de mayor edad o a los adultos tener acceso a la identidad jurídica. Esto es un poco en línea con los aspectos que describía Bhaskar de UNICEF en la presentación anterior. Finalmente, solo quisiera mencionar brevemente que México también realiza a cabo otras acciones en el Consejo de Derechos Humanos para abordar la inscripción de los nacimientos. Mencionaré 2. El primero tiene que ver con el mecanismo del examen periódico universal. Como parte de este proceso, México realiza recomendaciones a diversos estados en materia de registro de nacimiento y derecho a la nacionalidad, entre recomendaciones de diversos aspectos. Y la segunda iniciativa es que México forma parte del grupo núcleo que presenta la resolución sobre el derecho a la nacionalidad. Esta es una resolución liderada por Estados Unidos como penholder y en cuyo grupo, además de México, están también Australia, Colombia y Eslovaquia. Agradezco a todos por su atención y les deseo un muy buen día y quedo pendiente si hay preguntas en el segmento. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Omar. I think we had some problems with the translation, the interpretation, but for the most part, I think the English translation was okay. So I apologize for that. I would like to now see if there are any questions from the audience before we wrap up this session. I don't see any specific questions, but maybe I could just, before wrapping up, direct a question to each of the panelists, because I think, what this panel has demonstrated is it doesn't matter if you are a local organization, a UN institution, a state representative, there are things that we can all do to address some of these shortcomings where children who are stateless or don't have proof of identity, there are things that can be done on different levels to ameliorate or to remedy their situation. That has been clear. But with that said, I wondered if I could direct a question to each of the panelists, which is basically for you to maybe share your views on what more can or should be done to sort of address this challenge. What more can states do to ensure that children who don't have documents or nationality have better access to education. And I will start with Tahira, maybe to answer that question and go in the order that our speakers just spoke. Tahira, I don't think we can hear you. You might be on mute. Yeah. It's very low. We can't really hear you that well. Maybe try turning the volume.
Move on to somebody else and come back to me.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Oliemi, would you be willing to maybe share with us what you think states should be doing, what more they should be doing to sort of address this this challenge of undocumented and stateless children having problems to access education?
I think it's all encompassing. It's not a problem or a challenge that can be handled just by one organization. The state should please make it a kind of compulsory for all countries to make a kind of awareness to these parents, because many of these parents, they are not even aware that this document, it is very, very essential until when the need for them to register, I'm talking about Nigeria, to register their children in school. And once they try to register and they said there's a fee attached to it, you find out that they'll just leave the children to be roaming about the streets in Nigeria instead of them to do the needful. And because they did not go to the right place, because if they give birth to these children in government hospitals, it is free. They will give to them. No, yes, it is free. But if we want to collect it after birth, that is when the agency will now say, national population will now say they should pay a fee. So now the state can please let there be more awareness, enlightenment, reorientation. Even the government stakeholders that are connected to this, many of them are not even aware that this document should be provided free, no matter the time they approach the agency. Because when we approached them, they said they calculated the number of children we wanted to collect this document for. And they said we should go and bring that money. It was amazing that why are we going to pay? It's supposed to be a free legal document, universal for all the children. And that was where when we started, it wasn't an easy journey, because if we were not doing a kind of, we did not advocate for these children, we did not really talk to them about, reorientate them, enlighten them, and we did not do all those stress. If you cannot stress yourself in that situation as a CSO, as a local organization, because we persisted. Even when admission started, these children were still out of school. But at the end of the day, we were able to break through. So I just want to encourage all that are working with children. If you are working with the children, let the passion be the force, driving force. And when you know your rights, try and get to know what the document says about children. When you know your right, you put it in writing, you stand by it, and you educate. It's not a matter of fighting or shouting at the government, but let them be responsible. After this event, we found out that anything they want to do in this state, they will now invite Child Lifeline. Anything and anytime we send names of children to be registered in school, immediately they will place our children, which was not something we were enjoying before, without paying a dime. So it takes every one of us that are connected to the children, that have one thing or the other to do with the children, to stand for these children, knowing fully well the children cannot ask for their rights on their own, though we can engage them to know their rights, but they need the support of adults that are into the job that has to do with children. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Oliemi. And I mean, you said some really important things there. Supporting children, about rights, about obligations. Tahira, I want to maybe now turn to you to maybe come in from a different context and thinking about those obligations, maybe direct that question then to you. What do you think that states should be doing more in their obligation to ensure that children have access to education? Do you have any final words on that?
Yes, absolutely. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. As far as, I mean, one really, really important thing is that despite the fact that, of course, the right to nationality and the right to identity is a really important issue, I think the one thing that states need to do is de-link the right to education from the right to nationality. I mean, because in a lot of spaces, especially, for example, in Pakistan, the lack of nationality is a political issue. Children are stateless not because the law doesn't permit them to have nationality, it's because there are political issues that have created an implementation gap. So whereas the resolution of these issues, of course, is more complicated, the right to education is a basic right that every child should have, irrespective of his nationality status, irrespective of documentation. I think Mr. Mishra talked about birth registration and birth certificates. For example, in Pakistan, every child, irrespective of whether they are stateless or not, will have a birth certificate. And we have a digital system that gives you a citizenship number that then allows you access to education, despite the fact that it's a constitutional guarantee. So I think it is really, really important that whereas these larger political issues that intervene between the right to fundamental rights like education, health, and access to recreation, etc., should be de-linked from that right to nationality. And it's really, really important that it is a right across the board, irrespective of citizenship status of the children. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tahira. Bhaskar and Omar, I'd like to give you the final word on what more you think can be done.
So, Denisa, as always, I would say that all newborns.
Oh, Bhaskar, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
No, we can't hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So I would recommend that all newborns should be registered at birth or within first 6 weeks. Okay, the institutional delivery rates are going up, and it's very, very much possible to register at the place of birth. And if registration happens at health facilities, what I have seen that the extent of discrimination would be very minimal. My second recommendation would be simplify the processes, waive the fee for all children 0 to 17, and relax the norm for documentation. In some cases, I have seen that, like for example, in Bangladesh, for death registration, they need to have birth certificates, and this is for all age groups. When I was in Bangladesh in April, I saw a 93-year-old person died, and his birth was not registered. And now, because his birth was to be registered first for death registration, now you can understand the ordeal that the families, his relatives, had to undergo to find witnesses for his birth. Okay, so to summarize, what I would say that keep the processes very simple and generate demand. Parents should start asking for birth registration as one of their rights. Denisa.
Thank you so much, Bhaskar. Omar?
Thank you very much, Denisha. So I think that what states could do, it could be to disseminate, also with the help of civil society organizations and other stakeholders, to disseminate the content of the resolution on birth registration, for instance. Even if the resolution, the resolution, it's a soft law instrument, which means that it's not legally binding, although it can provide relevant legal criteria and standards to keep advancing on this issue, especially because it's based on the consensus, on the agreement of the states on the matter. So I think it should be really helpful to disseminate its content, and of course to contribute to the report that the resolution is calling to. In its one of its last paragraphs, the resolution is asking the High Commissioner for Human Rights to prepare a study on digital technologies and birth registration, and these contributions for this study, they should be open around 2024 for the study to be published around March 2025. But yeah, all the stakeholders, UN agencies, funds, civil society, states shall be invited to contribute, and I think that would also be very, very helpful to advance on this issue. And I thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Omar, and thank you to all of our panelists in this session. We're going to take a short break now. During the intermission, we will show some artwork that was prepared by stateless children that were a part of the Awareness Month. So through the work of our partners, we have compiled some artwork that we would love to share with you. And when we come back, we are going to have a different sort of session where we will invite the CRC and UNHCR and other speakers as well from civil society to share a platform and answer questions from children who are stateless, who had specific questions about what it means, their particular situation, and also relating to their access to education. So we will reconvene in about 5 minutes, and thank you so much for this session to all of our speakers.
আজকের শিশু আগামী দিনের ভবিষ্যৎ। শহীদপুরে 24টি ক্যাম্প রয়েছে। ক্যাম্পে বসবাসরত জনসংখ্যার 3 ভাগের 1 ভাগই শিশু। ক্যাম্পে বসবাসরত অভিভাবকগণের শিশু অধিকার সম্পর্কে তেমন ধারণা নেই এবং সচেতনতাও নেই, যার ফলে শিশুরা শিশু অধিকার থেকে বঞ্চিত হচ্ছে। পারিবারিক আর্থিক অসচ্ছলতার কারণে প্রতি 5 জন শিশুর মধ্যে 2 জনে বিভিন্ন ঝুঁকিপূর্ণ কাজের সাথে সম্পৃক্ত হচ্ছে, যার ফলে তাদের মানসিক বিকাশ বাধাগ্রস্ত হচ্ছে এবং কর্মক্ষেত্রে নানাভাবে শারীরিক নিপীড়নের শিকার হতে হচ্ছে।
আমি নেহাল, আমি ক্লাস 6 পড়ি, আমি লেখাপড়া করি, পাশাপাশি কাজ করি। আমাকে কাজ করতে ভালো লাগে না, আমি পড়ালেখা করে ডাক্তার হতে চাই। আমি মানুষের সেবা করি। আমি সকাল 7টার দিকে ঘুম থেকে উঠি। অনেক সময় আমাকে না খেয়ে স্কুলে যেতে হয়। স্কুল থেকে আসে আমাকে তাড়াতাড়ি কাজে যেতে হয়। কোনো সময় দোকানে যেতে দেরি হলে দোকানের মালিক আমাকে বকাবকি করে। কাজে কোনো ভুল হলে আমাকে মারে।
নিহাল কি পারবে তার স্বপ্ন পূরণ করতে, না ঝরে পড়ে যাবে আর 5টা শিশুর মতো? আমরা নিহালের মতো শিশুদের জন্য কি করতে পারি?
Hi, everyone. So good afternoon to all our distinguished panelists and guests. I would like to welcome you all to our third and the final session of the symposium on addressing the lack of education for children without identity documents. In the previous session, we looked at the challenges that children face when they don't have legal identity documents and good practices of different places addressing those challenges. In this session, in this final third and the final session, we will switch our gears a bit. We will hear from those children directly affected by this problem, stateless children, who are barred from going to school because of the lack of nationality or documentation. We will hear from them directly, and we will put their questions to our distinguished panelists as we explore initiatives and opportunities for change. I'm Neha Guru. Namaste, everyone. And I'm an ambassador for this month on childhood statelessness and education awareness month, and your moderator for today's session and discussion. Before we begin the discussion with our esteemed panelists, I would like to start by inviting Faith Marshall Harris, whose bio we'll be sharing in the chat. I'd like to invite Ms. Harris, who is a member of the Committee on the Rights of the Child, to deliver an opening remark. Over to you, Ms. Harris.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be addressing this symposium today, a very important one. As you said, I'm a member of the CRC, that is the committee which monitors the state's parties' compliance with rights of the child as they're set out in the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And we devote our time to questioning state parties closely, very closely, about the implementation of these rights. And depending on the outcome of the dialogue, we express concern in varying degrees. Sometimes we express concern about whether the rights are being observed or violated. And we also sometimes commend, and most often, of course, sometimes we recommend. With regard to the particular topic today, which revolve around Articles 7 and Articles 28, Article 7 established that birth registration and nationality are basic and inalienable rights for children. And Article 28 similarly spells out the child's right to education. And you will note that we do not just treat this as just access to education, but to quality education. In addition to these rights, we also ask states about their implementation of SDG 4, universal education, and SDG 16.9, the right to legal identity for all. In order to monitor states' compliance, we read numerous reports, not just from the state party itself, but from NGOs, organizations such as this one, from other UN agencies and treaty bodies, and from the special rapporteurs. And most importantly, we listen to children from these various states to hear what they think the state is doing about the implementation. Based on this, we asked state parties some searching questions, an intense dialogue, and after that, we based on that our recommendations. I must point out that the right to identity and its link to access to education may not always make the final list of concluding observations, since that we have a limited number which will make the final editing. But some, as you know, sometimes there may be greater priorities, such as life or death issues. But rest assured that wherever there's a major issue or concern in this regard, this will be put to the state party There will be a vigorous debate about it in the state party, so they are aware of our concerns, whether it makes a final recommendation or not. In doing so, we recognize that the lack of birth registration, while it is key to accessing education and quality education, we also know that even with birth registration, which is something that we have focused on in many, many states, sometimes we also have to look at other barriers, that because even with birth registration, sometimes that registration in itself reveals certain issues that then further cause prejudice to the child, especially children on the move. In our region in particular, this is a major issue. And for example, in our region, where even there is some acceptance that there is some form of documentation which will allow the children to attend school, in some areas, it is free to the other children, but for those children, they have got to pay for the education, even in the public system. And that creates, of course, a two-tier system, second-class citizens, if you will. And very often those children are from the poorest families because they may be parents, may be undocumented, may be afraid to apply for any form of documentation, and as a result have low-paying menial jobs and are struggling for survival, which of course can lead to child labor because they take children out of school to work to help them to survive. We question state parties on all of these matters. We, in fact, question Haiti very closely recently. Not Haiti, I beg your pardon, Dominican Republic, about the Haitians in the Dominican Republic very closely, because we recognize that many Haitians were living in the Dominican Republic unregulated. They were even afraid to come forward because they were afraid of being deported. And as a result, those children had very little access to education. We will be questioning Guatemala very closely in the upcoming sessions about the indigenous children and minority children who do not have proper access to education because of their lack of documentation. This is an ongoing process with us all the time. We have noted, I've mentioned just my region, but we've noted across the world, there are varying stages of this problem. In the developed world, taken apart from Gulag, we have noted that the question of refugees has created a major problem in terms of access to quality education. Because again, the refugees typically do not necessarily want to do the necessary registration, except they can be assured that this would not lead to deportation. And therefore children suffer. It can lead to trafficking of children, which we have noted in many states. The question of whether the CRC can do more, obviously, we will examine later. But I want to draw your attention to, we have another mechanism in OPIC, where we adjudicate cases under that optional protocol of individual communications, but sadly, not enough states have actually ratified that optional protocol. So we do not have an opportunity to adjudicate those matters, but where we have had some very impressive outcomes in assuring that children can get educated without necessarily being able to first have all their identity papers ready, and then how to assist them in getting those. We in the CRC say that the access to education must extend to all children within the territory, with or without citizenship. And that therefore this right must be made available to them. And we are therefore working very much towards getting state parties to understand that once their children are within their shores, that right, it must be there, and that they must install all mechanisms possible to ensure that children can access the education and quality education. And finally, let me say we are concerned that sometimes they can access informal education, which is unstructured, unregulated, and probably without accreditation. These are our concerns, and we make them very, very clear in our discussion with state parties and in our recommendations where we can. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Harris, for officially opening the session and most importantly, underscoring the importance of education, of child education, including the rights of stateless children to education. And like you mentioned, there are so many issues that we need to deal with, ratification, convincing states to ratify optional protocols, and there are multi-layered problems attached to stateless children who are also impacted by other interrelated problems like poverty or other issues that also impacts them. And extremely thank you for underscoring all these important things. As I mentioned at the start of the session, I have had this opportunity to serve as ambassador for the first ever Awareness Month of Childhood Statelessness and Education, aimed at raising awareness about the critical need for stateless children to have equal and equitable access to quality education, and empowering stateless children to take action and stand up for their rights. So children's involvement is equally important. During November, more than 10 countries participated in this month-long activities, engaging kids and children to give them a voice and creative outlet to share their experiences as a stateless children. And during those activities, we canvassed the views of stateless children to understand the most pressing question they would like to ask, or they have most pressing questions they have to the policymakers or child rights actors if they had the opportunity to ask them directly. And in this session, we will pose those questions to our panelists and try to seek answers to those questions from those stateless children who have submitted us their questions. So joining us today on this panel, I'd like to introduce our panelists now, and we will be sharing their bios in the chat box. Do visit our chat box to know more about them. Faith Marshall Harris, who you just met, representing the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child. Monica Savvi, head of the UNHCR's Statelessness section. Elvis Berissa, and correct me if I've pronounced it wrong, head of the, representing Firen Amenka. Ali Johar, representing the Rohingya Human Rights Initiative. Welcome all the panelists to our final session of the symposium. I'd like to start the session by directing the first question to the UNCRC committee, the Child Rights Committee. The Committee on the Rights of the Children plays a significant role in the protection of all the children's rights. So we have a question from 12-year-old Anis. He's a boy who participated in the Awareness Month activities, and he would like to understand more about the CRC's role. And he specifically asks whether the CRC helps us break the cycle of poverty and exclusion. Perhaps you can enlighten us on the role of CRC committee, what it does to ensure the rights of the stateless children, and what it can do to help break the cycle of poverty and exclusion that children are facing because they are having to deal with the statelessness issue at a very early age.
I believe that question is directed to me. What we are doing, as I said, that our main mandate is to ask the questions, and these questions can be very tough. And we spent, and it's within a kind of a 3-year cycle. We start out first with getting the state parties answers to some written questions, that is our list of issues, or we examine the state party report. And then we invite any of the persons who have a role to play to report to us, and we do read them. So we have 100 reports to read, and we then finally invite children to Geneva. And we think that by having this dialogue, which I explained before, and it happens over a 3-year cycle. So the final dialogue is with the state party again. We bring them there to Geneva and we talk to them over 2 days about what they're doing. We think that mechanism of drawing to their attention what needs to be done, reminding them of their ratification of the CRC and optional protocols, and actually a full examination of what they're doing. We not only, of course, restrict ourselves to the matters we're dealing with here today, but poverty is a big issue that we deal with. Remember that I mentioned earlier that we sometimes do not actually mention access to education directly or birth registration directly in our final recommendations. It's because sometimes poverty and all that means in terms of right to life can supersede all of these matters. As I said, issues of life and death. So we think that we work pretty hard on saying to the state parties that this is what you must do, this is what we require of you, and we will set it out for you in clear terms that we think you are not complying, you are in violation, and where a country has ratified OPIC, that is an even stronger position that we take because we issue a judgment, and hoping that, of course, that this resonates. And so far, those cases, or judgment have resonated with state parties where we have found them in violation. That is what we can do. Obviously, the question of trying to make sure that state parties adhere to these recommendations is not necessarily within our power because there are sovereign states. But we, of course, make sure, I wouldn't like to say name and shame, but it comes close to something like that.
Thank you very much for that, Ms. Faith. Indeed, the committee plays a critical role in monitoring implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Child. And that role definitely differs from the role of UNHCR, which is mandated to work specifically on matters related to statelessness. So with that in mind, I would like to now welcome Monica Sazvik to the conversation, who heads UNHCR statelessness section. So we have a question for you, Ms. Monica, from a 10 years old whose name is also Monica. And she asks, before asking her question, I would like to say that UNHCR has launched 10 years back. It had launched its I Belong campaign to end statelessness in 2024. But as we approach by 2024, and as we approach 2024, statelessness remains a sad reality for several million children around the world. So one of the question is from our children is that who wonders why he is considered stateless and what can be done to acquire nationality. So this is a very critical and a very basic question for a child, but also a very very heavy question that a child has to think of. So he asked, like, why is he considered stateless and what can be done to acquire nationality? So can you elaborate on what UNHCR is doing to address child statelessness and the potential role the Global Alliance to End Statelessness could play once the alliance is launched?
Thank you, Neha. Thank you so much. I think in terms of the child of the question of the 10-year-old Monica, it's hard to answer that question without really knowing the background in terms of where he or she comes from. But I think in general, states have the right to decide who are their nationals or who are not their nationals. That's something that is within the sovereignty of states. But luckily, the way the international community has organized itself and the rules that we have collectively agreed to be bound by put some limits on the state's ability to decide who is in and who is out in terms of nationality. So, for example, there should be no discrimination in terms of excluding certain groups of people. That is not considered to be in line with international law. But we know that there are kind of reasons why general reasons why people become stateless, and it could be gender discrimination in nationality laws. It could be issues around state succession, when new states are created, or other states cease to exist, or just people who are falling between the cracks in terms of not being able to access birth registration, which then, as we've heard today, is really a key document to prove link to a state so that you can claim your nationality. So that's maybe is some general points in terms of the question from Monica. But in terms of what UNHCR does to address statelessness or childhood statelessness, so as you mentioned, we have this 10-year campaign called I Belong campaign, which I think has become somehow almost synonymous to what we do on statelessness, the I Belong campaign. And as part of that, there was a global action plan which has 10 actions that were declared, and there's a few actions that relates to efforts to end to address childhood statelessness, including action 2, ensuring that no child is born stateless, and addressing gender discrimination and birth registration. So these are some of the key kind of principles that we try to advocate and incorporate in our work in various countries in the world or in regions or at the global level. So I think I'll have to limit my answer to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. This is indeed hopeful that the Global Alliance is being launched, and there are so many works being initiated at a global level through UN. And we, of course, share your optimism. So we are, on this note, I would like to say that we are also fortunate to have joining today 2 people who understand the ramification of statelessness all too well. Elvis Berissa, who represents Firen Amenka, an NGO that works with Roma in Europe, and Ali Johar, who works with the Rohingya Human Rights Initiative, and who is also my very good friend. They are here to share insight on specific challenges faced by Roma children in Europe and Rohingya children in different parts of the world. So I'd like to welcome you both to the program. Let's start with Elvis. Maybe if you can start by asking, you to share a bit of background on situation of Roma children in Europe and their specific challenges relating to accessing education. And what are the different challenges and problems they face in this scenario? I'm afraid you're not audible.
I hope you hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Great. Thank you, Neha. I just want to say hi to you and to all our participants. Thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to be part of this, I can say, very important, and I'm really happy that I can see too many people with such as experience and amazing results and their everyday work that they are doing and fighting for our basic rights, I can say. I will start with some very short introductory about background of situation of Roma in Europe. So just to know that Roma are among Europe's oldest, largest, and most marginalized ethnic minorities. In Western Balkans, many people affected by the risk or by the statelessness belong to the Roma community. Roma are victims of human rights violations, including policy brutality, segregation in education, and hate crime. But as well, they are subject to poverty, inequality, anti-Gypsyism, and discrimination in nearly all areas of life, spanning from employment to housing, health, and education. So Roma are also disproportionately impacted by barriers to birth and civil registration due to a range of factors, including inability to meet documentary evidence requirements and discriminatory attitudes of registry officials, which puts them at risk of statelessness. The impact of lack of access to birth registration and civil documentation of Roma, including children, is very significant. These challenges contribute to further marginalization of Romani population in Europe, but also in Western Balkan, as they prevent them from accessing the rights, including education, healthcare, employment, and housing, and in addition to the right to a nationality. So this, in turn, perpetuates a vicious cycle of discrimination. For example, lack of birth registration and civil documentation may prevent access to education, which leads to low literacy rates, which may hinder understanding of bureaucratic procedures. Therefore, lack of access to formal education is also both a consequence of statelessness due to lack of required documentation and the cause due to a lack of understanding of bureaucratic procedures. In Montenegro, children until the age of 15 can access education, but they will not be granted a school certificate if they do not hold a birth certificate. So stateless children with a residence permit have access to higher education, social security, health insurance, and emergency healthcare, although they may encounter bureaucratic difficulties and be required to pay for some medical care, but only in case if they are granted with permit issued for a stateless person. On the other hand, when it comes to Roma children, to our knowledge, there are no such cases because Roma children often faced obstacles in educational process as they are not officially recognized as a stateless. So I just wanted to really highlight this point because this is the first step and the first obstacles which are faced by Roma children, and after that we can talk about more and more issues that they are facing in everyday life. So if you are a child in Roma community, for example, the authorities are not recognizing you legally because in Montenegro officially we don't have any case recognized as stateless, officially stateless person, which are, for example, children. And in the other hand, the children are the most affected and they are at risk to be stateless because the legal framework is I cannot say it's not simplified, but we still have some obstacles. For example, if one of the parents is not Montenegrin citizens, then the children are automatically they will have consequences in their solving their legal status in Montenegro, so they cannot be Montenegrin citizens. And usually the children are coming, which are facing these problems, they are coming from Roma parents who are origin from Kosovo or Serbia. These are countries in the region in Western Balkan, and if they are coming from these countries, then if the child born in Montenegro, he have to go. I mean, his parents have to go with him to Serbia or to Kosovo to register him in birth registration and citizens registration in Kosovo, then to come back to Montenegro to start with process. And this process is not financially really acceptable for Roma families. And as well, it's not just to finance, it's as well to very other issues, like parents usually cannot travel to Kosovo because of lacking of documentation for travel. I will stop here because I know I have very short time, but I will be happy to make some recommendation in the continued session.
Thank you so much, Elvis, for sharing such heartbreaking stories. But just to insert a small query that I had, like, while listening to you, I just wanted to know very quickly, like, what are the different things that the community is doing to ensure that there is change achieved. So is there any initiatives or any works that you could share with us, like, in extremely short time that you have?
Yeah, thank you. So I will try shortly, but I'm not sure if I will be successful in explaining. We have UNHCR office in Montenegro, and we have as well other organizations which are dealing with helping Roma community. And Montenegro adopted SDP as well. So we are trying as an organization to help the community through using the legal framework and the recommendation from international organization, etc. But what we are doing as an organization is trying to provide concretely financial support to the community, and concretely legal aid or legal help to the community, because combination of financial support and free legal aid is the best option to concretely help. But we have some very complex cases which I think we don't have time today in this session to go through them. But for example, we have people who are coming from, for example, from North Macedonia, the first child born in Serbia, the second in Kosovo, the third in Montenegro, and then you have a family with very difficult and different situations. Some children are not registered at birth registration, and we have to start from the zero, but that's not problem. The problem is really very complex bureaucratic procedures, and because of that, we really need help from UNHCR first, because they are dealing and they have mandate to deal with all these countries, but as well from authorities from all the countries, and help from the organization which can help us, like Institute of Statelessness and Inclusion, which we had a really good cooperation in the last 3 years, supporting by the true projects. We were very successful to help, I think, around 80 peoples to be identified legally in Montenegro. So this is just some of initiatives, but yeah, we had also one documentary film which is presenting the situation very well. So I just can say that you can all the participants can go to our YouTube channel, but I will send the link of the documentary in the chat, so they can maybe who is interested to see it.
Yeah.
I hope I answered to your question, but
yeah, Thank you so much, Elvis, for I know it was a short time, but extremely thank you for sharing. It was really good to hear the encouraging works that you've been doing, and all the support that you've been providing to people or to children in need. Now, may I invite you, Ali, to share the specific challenges that Rohingya children face in different contexts around the world.
Thank you very much, Neha. So, to give a background about the Rohingya children, so after the 1982 citizenship law, Rohingyas are entirely rendered stateless by the military regime in Myanmar. So since then, the military regime has done everything to exclude the Rohingya from accessing any sort of developmental opportunity. So one of the tactic they have done is changing documentation. So in late 90s, the birth certificate or any document that are being issued, they mention the ethnic name for Rohingya as Bengali. So fearing that the Rohingyas will be nationalized as Bangladeshi, many people refuse to take documentation that include registering their children as well. And to send a child to school, definitely a child needs a birth certificate. Due to the corrupt system in Myanmar, anyone who seeks any documentation, including birth certificate for a child, to send the child to school, have to count a lot of money at the different officials. So this has also hugely impacted in the rural area where people are dealing with poverty and they are being asked to pay bribes before the officials to secure a document. And also they don't have necessary informations or awareness about how a document is really important for the future of their children. So this is one side. On other side, Rohingya children are entirely, technically excluded from education. In an effective way. How the government, most of the educational institutions are being put in places where Rohingyas can hardly get access. So, for example, in the rural area where Rohingya villages are majority, we see there are less schools. So, if a child who completes, by crossing all the challenges, the primary school, have to now, find a high school crossing several villages. And now for a Rohingya in Myanmar to cross a village, need a government permission, which is kind of getting an immigration clearance. So if a child who is 11 or 12 years old need to cross several villages and need a government permission, now it's again another scrutiny they have to go through. So somehow, if they can finish, matriculation, then there is only one university in entire Arakan state where Rohingya comes from, that is Sikri University, where Rohingyas can afford to go. But that's also from the mercy of the government, and that needs extra layer of documentation as clearance, like immigration documentation. So all these things makes even more difficult for a Rohingya girl child because there are risks and safety issues. At the same time, there are cultural barriers as well. So, like from percentage wise, from 100 children who may be able to attend primary school, only 2-3% child student can make it up to the university. That also depend on if the situation in Rakhine State is hostile or not. So if there are armed conflict happening, then it is always the the victimized situation happen for Rohingya students, because the government cites that there are security issues. We cannot give clearance for Rohingya students to go to the university. So this happened, during the 2012 violence, during 2016 and 17 violence. But recently, after 2012, just last year, the government has given clearance to like several students. That's also very few. So if any student who may be able to afford to finish a matriculation, but cannot afford to go to university in Sittwe, if the child wants to cross the border and find education in another country, the child doesn't have a travel document to cross the border. So they're denied education in their own country, as well as they cannot even travel in another country to find education. Somehow, by covering all the risks, if the child can cross the border, there is Bangladesh and India, Thailand and Malaysia, Indonesia, where most of the Rohingya refugees can really afford to go. All these countries did not sign 1951 Convention or 1967 Protocol, and they treat any refugees, including Rohingyas, as an immigrant or as a foreigner. So when a country lacking a refugee law treat a person as an immigrant, but if the person is a stateless person and cannot prove that he or she is from a particular country, there is no way the child can access any education, even though the country's law may be may make it compulsory for the state to make sure a child must be at school at any cost, or make the education a fundamental right. For example, India, Article 21A of the Constitution makes it compulsory for the government to make all the effort to make sure the child is at the school, and the education is a fundamental right. But because Rohingya children are being treated as a foreigner, they cannot show a passport or a travel document or a citizenship document for their own country. Being stateless, they are being denied education. In Bangladesh, most importantly, after the 2016 and 17 violence, majority of the Rohingyas are being forced to flee to Bangladesh and being forced to live in Berwet War under the world's largest refugee camp. And now the half of the population, which is 500,000 children, is excluded from accessing formal education. Whatever they have is community initiative that is really informal. That is also being, targeted by time to time by the government. For the community initiatives are not even also encouraged. Now, since 6 years, the children who may have finished their primary school in Myanmar have been without access to education in Bangladesh for 5 years. The child has became 15 years old. The child should have finished high school till now, but have no access to any formal education. This is really an alarming situation for Rohingya children in Bangladesh, because our children are being forced to, 100 years back, we are being forced to a dark age. So to just give an example of a girl who completed somehow matriculation in India, we tried several high school for her admission. Majority of the school refused, but one school, breaking all the odds, decided to give her admission. That was just till 12th standard. So after she excelled 12th standard, we helped her appear for an entrance exam at a university called Jamia Millia Islamia University. She was interested in doing a law course. She came, she was selected. She was able to crack the entrance exam, but the government did not give her clearance to, do the course because she doesn't have a nationality and she could not prove her citizenship. So in that case, most of the children are being forced to hide their identity and alter their identity, forge their identity just to get education, which is a fundamental right of anyone, regardless of their background. So she somehow, completed university, and she recently actually got a scholarship at a renowned university in Canada. And the Canadian High Commission has also issued her a visa, but the Indian government has refused her an exit visa. So this is kind of a situation how Rohingya children are going through. They have been denied education in their own country. They are denied movement of, they are restricted. They have been restricted to live in concentrated area. They cannot leave their country. If they leave and find themselves in refugee situation, and they have to be reminded that they are stateless, still there is no legal mechanism that support their education.
Thank you so much, Ali, for sharing about the children or Rohingya children in so much detail. As we heard from both Elvis and Ali, two different situations, but same circumstances and same sort of right violations. Thank you both for sharing all the issues and sharing everything with us. On this note, I would like to go to our final question for all the speakers, for all the panelists we have today. So this question is from an 8-year-old Marjan, and this is directed to all the panelists. And he asks that what more can be done to better secure the future of stateless kids and ensure their access to education. This is a very critical question, I guess, and the one that looks forward and looks towards solution, and also looks towards what can be done not only by the participation of children and all the stakeholders, but also by the committee, by UNHCR, by activists, by actors, and everyone involved and believing for change. So just reiterating the question again, what more can be done to better secure the future of stateless kids and ensure their access to education? So I would like to start this question with Faith.
Yes, thank you. I was thinking all the time I was listening to the other panelists about this, because what we do try to emphasize and remind every state, yes, you're a sovereign state and you may determine who your citizens are, but if you have ratified the convention, and 196 countries have done, which is almost universal ratification, what you did agree to was that all the children living in your boundaries are entitled to these rights, such as the right to education, and not only education, of course, like we mentioned, to all social services, and also that every child, excuse me, has a right to identity, excuse me, registration, and national identity. I beg your pardon. So consequently, we emphasize over and over again that you can't choose to discriminate against any child, because you have already ratified that you will treat every child equally and give them access to all social services. But one of the things that I should mention that worries us is even in countries where there's jus solis, that is, a child born in a country is entitled to citizenship of that country regardless of the status of their parents. We find even in those countries sometimes access is denied by virtue of administrative detail, such as making a note on birth registration that this is a child of a stateless person. And we are working very hard on trying to eliminate these sort of violations. We think it is important for us to continue the advocacy, continue sending the message that you have agreed to do this for children, regardless of status, and that they are entitled to education and all other transformative assistance that can be rendered to them, whether refugee, minority, whatever, because children seldom make the choice to move. Very often they are migrating with parents because of the economic circumstances, armed conflict. And sadly, that is very much a feature of what is happening right now in the world, that a lot of children are dispossessed because they're facing the results of armed conflict among adults. And they are therefore starting life very much below par. This is something that we are very concerned about, and we keep reminding states that children do not deserve this and they're entitled to better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Faith, for putting it very strongly that the states not only have the, like Monica also mentioned a while ago, the states don't only have the right to define their national laws, but they also have the right, if they've ratified and signed these conventions, they also have the right to protect children's rights and human rights, besides having the power to define its national laws. They have the obligation to ensure that every child has the right to education. Thank you so much for putting forward that very strongly. Now I'd like to move to Monica, and with the same question as to what more can be done to better secure the future of stateless kids and ensure their access to education.
Thanks. I think I have 4 points to make. I think the first one really is about the importance of solving the situation of statelessness, making sure that children aren't born stateless and that those who are stateless are identified and there's a nationality solution found for them. I think that's key. But we do know, the people on this call know very well that this is often longer term work. It will take time. We are maybe looking at solving not today's generation, but maybe the following generation in terms of really addressing some of these issues. Sometimes it can be done quicker, sometimes it takes longer time. I think one thing that we also need to emphasize is that, providing educational services or education to children is not a favor you do to children. It is a favor to you that you do to your nation. It's what Ali was talking about, the loss of education among the Rohingya, generation, really. What a loss of human capital for Bangladesh or Myanmar, wherever they live, or in the diaspora. So I think we really need to emphasize to states that it doesn't benefit them in any way to exclude children from education. And then I think, while we are working on that bigger and longer term solution on solving statelessness, I think we also need to try to find practical solutions, where children are lacking birth certificates. And then it is about speaking to the Ministry of Education, or even more locally to speak to principals, to district education officials, and look at concrete solutions in terms of how this can be addressed while this piece of paper is somehow being, the issue of the lack of documentation is being solved. I think there can be practical, more smaller scale solutions as well. Then finally, the 4th point is really about working together, and that brings us to the Global Alliance. I think both at the global level, the regional level, and at the national level, the importance of bringing together all the various actors, the stateless-led organizations, civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, governments and UN agencies, academia, the Committee on the Rights of the Child is really essential in terms of addressing these issues, and also advocating for the rights, for the protection of rights of stateless persons. And I think that's where the Global Alliance is also coming in, because it is a kind of an entity that will bring together all these actors together with member states as well, to advance and trying to advocate and provide solutions for certain aspects of statelessness. So those are my 4 points. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica, for sharing such concrete and specific steps. And I totally agree when you say that when we educate children, when we ensure that every child has education, it's not only benefiting the child and the family, it's benefiting the society and the country, the economy, if you have to say. And I also agree when you say that there are some practical steps that can be taken. And just to share a small example of the practical steps that we in Nepal have been taking is through our organization. We've been doing this awareness program in school itself, in this awareness month also. And when we're doing the awareness program for the children at the school, we also ensure that the teachers are there, the principals are there, we involve them in all the processes. So any children who's facing documentation challenges, the teachers has to be aware, because often when teachers are not aware, they act very insensitively to children who are really suffering. So so these are like small practical steps that you mentioned, and I really do agree with that. Now moving on with the same question with Elvis, could you share like how we can better secure stateless kids and ensure their education?
Thank you. So I will start with something what is regarding to the UNHCR guidance. And I think that international community, especially UNHCR and other organizations, have make pressure to the authorities to ensure that policies and practices relating to birth registration take it into account UNHCR guidance and remove all practical barriers to birth registration, with a particular focus on minority groups, including as well Roma and Egyptian communities in Montenegro. So the first, this will be, but the second recommendation or something what we can do is as well to ensure that children's nationality status is determined as soon as possible after birth, in order to ensure that otherwise stateless children born in Montenegro acquire a nationality. So this is for Montenegro, but I think it can be also implemented for other countries. The birth registration process faces serious implementation issues. Births must be registered within 3 days, for example, and it is difficult to register births that occurred outside medical institutions. We have some, a few cases for Roma women that they are born a child out of medical institutions. And for example, in Montenegro, law does not have any guidance on how to determine that child's nationality status. These obstacles, together with discrimination and anti-Gypsyism, contribute to low birth registration rates among Roma and Egyptian communities. And just to finish as well, I wanted to say that Pirena Mensa, with support of ENS, tried to identify some crucial barriers and obstacles. And in the previous period, we identified a few of them. And we really, as an organization now, we are very ready to cooperate with other organizations, especially with UNHCR office in Montenegro and with other as well NGO, to fight with all these barriers. So for first, in Montenegro, we really have officially accurate data of all Roma children that are stateless. In this way, we can work towards securing for them a residence permit, or to simplify the procedure to obtain Montenegrin nationality, because although the procedure is simplified, in the case of Roma children and the complex situation of their parents, we need to go a step forward and simplify even more the whole procedure. In these efforts, regional cooperation is really crucial. I mentioned that in my previous speech, but also UNHCR can be the strongest ally in the whole process. So I'm forcing the UNHCR because in Montenegro, we know that they have mandate to work with this kind of target groups, and we saw that when is UNHCR involved in some process, then authorities really appreciate that, and they have more results.
Thank you, Elvis, for sharing your solutions with us. We're actually out of time, but it would be unfair to give Ali a chance. Maybe Ali, can you share your answer in just a sentence? And sorry for that.
Thank you very much. So I think, it costs state more, it costs more for state to exclude children from education than really allowing them to schools and universities. Because it's what a waste of, human resource when children are being excluded from educational or developmental opportunity. Regardless of the background, a child should not be seen as, stateless or anything, but a child, and should be allowed to school and educational opportunities as well as developmental opportunities.
Thank you, Ali. Now ending at that note that children, ensuring education for all the children is not just for the children and the families, but it's for the betterment. It's a win-win situation for all the stakeholders involved and everyone. So with this note, I'd like to thank everyone who's participated in the session and for all the comments that you've shared. There hasn't been any questions, but there has been a lot of messages that you shared, and I really thank you for that. And for all the panelists for giving your time and sharing your thoughts and your time with us. Thank you.